Story in games can be often overlooked, but it's a crucial part of a game's identity and usually what distinguishes them from other titles. For example, what difference would Baldur's Gate 3 have from other D&D type of games if not for the story? Of course, not all games need to have a great story to be considered unique or an amazing game. For example, Ultra Kill. This game has a story, but the player doesn't need to know it or even acknowledge it to enjoy the game. But the story in these type of games will give depth to an otherwise simple game. Let's take for example the FNAF series from 1 to 4. Without the story, the FNAF games would just be about surviving in a place full of assassin robots, but it wouldn't be as interesting as it currently is. This also gave something for the player to chew on when the game inevitably ends. Let's take again the FNAF series. The story is what made the game what it is. The theories the community made about the story, and in general the speculation about the grand story, is what made the FNAF series so popular. All of this happened because the creator decided to add just some breadcrumbs of a possible story in this otherwise plain game. With all of this said, of course my dream game is also gonna need a banger story. Abyss Forge actually had 3 different stories before the final one that I'm working on right now. Why 3? Because when I make a game, I start with the story, but while I'm writing it, I also figure out the core gameplay loop and everything that I'll need to actually build the game. So yeah, I basically merge the story writing and game design into one document. Is it the best way to do it? I don't know. Is it the way I do it? Yes. Are we too deep to change now? Also yes. But because of that, I ended up with 3 complete stories that I'm just never gonna use, which is amazing. Yes, very efficient, 10 out of 10 use of my time. So naturally, instead of letting them collect digital dust like my unfinished projects, yes, I'm talking about you, Snowy's Shifts, I thought, why not turn them into content? Because if there's one thing we love on YouTube, it's recycling our own suffering. So yeah, I present to you the 3 stories that never made the cut. The first story is set in a fantasy world where magic, other races, and monsters exist. In this world exists a kingdom by the name Falsestia, and you, the protagonist, got chosen by the church to be the hero of the kingdom, and kill the demonic forces that approach the kingdom each day. But something terrible happened. You got framed by someone from the royal family, and the kingdom banished you from their territories. You had lost everything, your family, friends, and every possession that you ever had. With this realization came a sense. A fire that burned through you. Rage. Violence. The fire of revenge. Yes, this is a revenge story, which is, by the way, one of my favorite stories. You are left in a piece of disputed land between the demons and the human forces. More specifically, in a small village in the middle of a forest. The tensions are high, and from what you see, you're one of the few adventurers in the village. With this fire of revenge coursing through your veins, you would need to build relations with the locals and other adventurers to either push the demonic forces away from the village or create relations with said forces to aid them invade the kingdom that did you wrong. As you can see, this first story had a huge scope in the form of side quests, main quests, relations with NPCs. I was literally making NPCs with more emotional depth than me at 3 AM questioning why I decided to become a YouTuber. I abandoned this story because I didn't feel like the beginning was good enough, and I also felt this project was way out of my scope for a single developer like me. The thing that got me extremely scared was the creation of lots of levels and optimizing them, because making one level is fun, making 10 is a pain, and optimizing all of them? Nah! This problem will be one of the biggest problems for this ambitious project, but I will talk about it later in the video. Gotta keep the retention up, you know? If you leave now, the algorithm will personally come to my homeless shelter. So yeah, it's no surprise that I decided to start writing another story in the new setting, but I did keep some things like the characters that I had already made, the gameplay loop, and the quests in general, because if I suffer from making them, I'm reusing them. We do not waste content in this economy. This first story would have a lot of similarities to this one, but it's still worth mentioning because of some changes I decided to add. In this world, where magic and otherworldly beings exist, there existed an eternal war against the humans and said magical beings. And every few millennia, both humans and magical beasts created what they called the Heroes Party in an attempt to lead and win the war. They consisted of the most talented personnel they had access to, and they were expected to make the grand journey to each other's main castles to destroy and take over them, promising a great deal of land, glory, and titles from their corresponding kingdoms. You, the player, were chosen to be part of the Heroes Party on the human side. and your objective was to find talented people for your party to eventually raid the other kingdom and get the glory that came with it. The player would start in the kingdom where you would get your first set of gear and get to meet your first ally to join your first expedition to a dungeon. From there, you would jump from village to village trying to find new people to add to your party, exploring dungeons, and if the player so chooses, do some side quests related to each village and their adventurers guild. At the end, you would need to choose which side you're gonna attack, the humans or the magical beings, and you would get different endings based on the choices you made along the way. I like this idea a lot, so much in fact that I started thinking that I was about to cook the game of the year, so naturally I ran with it and started making the first prototypes. But the game wasn't Abyss Forged yet. It didn't even have a proper name. It was called First Person Melee Combat Experiment, which sounds less like a game and more like a science project that accidentally gets someone expelled. But the reason why I decided not to follow this idea was, once again, scope. The idea was amazing and it still is, but this would require a full team to help me build it in the way I imagined. And as I said before, I'm a solo dev, not a team. Just me, my PC, and the occasional in case I had enough. The reason I knew this was out of scope? Level design, NPCs in combat. Remember, this was a fast-paced game, and optimization, basically all the hardest parts of a game development. I really thought I was built different, but I'm not. Now you might be asking, why is optimization such a big deal? And yeah, fair question. Well, it's no secret that Unreal Engine, the engine I use, can struggle with optimization, especially with blueprints and complex levels. To put it simply, Unreal Engine is like, yeah little bro, add another dynamic light, no biggie. And then your FPS drops harder than the stock market when Orange Man declared war on Iran. Meanwhile, if you compare it to Unity, the engine my friend Simon Stash uses, things are a bit more lightweight by default. The graphics aren't as realistic out of the box, the lighting is simpler, but at least your PC isn't fighting for its life every time you press play. And when you build your game in Unity, it includes only the assets you actually used. Unreal Engine? Nope. Unreal is like, yeah, you touched this file once in 2019? Yeah, that's going to build. So yeah, you can probably see why I was so terrified of optimization. Well, now we reached the story that was supposed to be the one that I would go with. This story is drastically different from the other two because I needed to reduce the scope as best as I could, so I could make the game 5 years minimum. So the story begins like this. Long ago, it was believed that God had no interest in the mortal world, but in this story, this would be far from the truth. This God took interest in the little planet in the galaxy. This planet had humans, elves, monsters, vampires, ogres, goblins, basically everything that you would see in a typical fantasy world. But all of the humans became after losing the evolution war. This wasn't a rarity, rather it was normal for the weak to become irrelevant, but this god saw how the humans had almost unlimited potential, so he wondered, what if they became strong? What could they do? This was where the first divine intervention happened, and humans who didn't have access to mana or magic received a mana pool, basically a way to cast spells. The humans at the start couldn't do much, since they had been in for generations, but after some time, a human whose name only God knew developed a magic that could break the limits of any and only humans. This magic gave him power that could even rival one of God's, and he used it to get humans out of it and start his own kingdom. He even destroyed kingdoms with such power. No one could rival him, because this magic only worked on other humans. So their only choice was diplomacy, but that failed as well. They would not stop until the humans had every other race in. When God saw this, he could not believe his eyes. He had created a monster. The humans were so strong that even God himself saw them as a possible threat. Divine interventions were never meant to be used or even made, because that would mean taking a side, which was never meant to happen in the first place. So God had to make a choice. He could either let them be and hope for the best, or he could just make the second divine intervention and possibly destroy himself in the process. He decided to atone for his sins and sacrifice himself for the greater good. Upon making his second divine intervention, humans had already anticipated something like that could happen, so they created items infused with magic, so that they themselves didn't need to use magic. God had failed. Humans continued to rule over the planet, and the other races were unable to return to their former glory. So angels decided to launch a plague onto the earth, the dungeons. They were full of monsters and would overflow if not conquered or taken care of. But this did little to stop humans, since they decided to use those dungeons as prisons, so that they themselves wouldn't need to take care of the dungeons. This is when you get introduced. You were from a family of that used in combat that ran away from your owners. But after your family got caught, they all faced the death penalty, except you. You were deemed worthy of getting a second chance, they said. If you conquered one of the great dungeons, you could return to your normal life without being They never intended for you to conquer the dungeon. They knew this wasn't possible for you, but they needed people inside those things to keep them from overflowing with monsters and getting the chance for them to escape the dungeon. So you were just lucky in the sense that you could be alive for a little longer, but you don't intend to die here. You need to get out of here to punish those who killed your family. This story is a bit longer because at the time I really wanted to bring divinity into the main plot. You know, gods, angels, higher powers, the whole "you were the chosen one, Anakin." But I ended up changing that in the final version, mostly because I kinda grew out of those types of stories. Don't get me wrong, I still think they're cool, but I didn't want my game to feel like every isekai anime, where the main character accidentally becomes the strongest in the entire universe by episode 3. I still want to include those elements, just not as the main focus, more like a "wait, what?" kind of moment. I also reduced the scope a lot. Instead of multiple dungeons, I focus on a single dungeon, because apparently making one good dungeon is already a full-time job. Who knew? But in the end, the story also got scrapped, and the reason is kind of funny. It's because of the main protagonist's motivation, revenge. Now, I know I said this was one of my favorite story ideas, and it still is, but revenge stories in video games are kinda tricky, because you really need the player to feel that motivation. If the player doesn't care, then you're basically just an angry guy speedrunning every war crime in the book. Like, if I don't know who hurt you, I'm not gonna be invested. That was the thought that I had while reading the story. So I decided to take a different approach, one that I'd actually be satisfied with, and one that I'd be sticking with moving forward. Unfortunately, this video is already getting way too long, so I can't show you how the new story starts. Gotta save something for the sequel, or you know, for when the YouTube algorithm decides I'm worthy again. But I can say that the player will start in a similar way to the previous version. Of course, the backstory is completely different, but the setting is much friendlier. It also makes the player character more of a blank canvas, which is really important, because now the player gets to decide what motivates them to move forward. Basically, you bring your own drama this time around. And yes, the story still takes place in a dungeon. Just one, because we learned our lesson. We are not doing open world, 12 regions, 300 quests. Absolutely not. That version of me was delusional. Keeping it to one dungeon reduces the scope a lot, and also means that I don't have to worry as much about optimization. My PC can finally rest. It's been through enough. And overall, it's just way more expandable. Like, I can actually add things over time without my project collapsing like a poorly placed Jenga tower. So if you'd like to hear more about this story, let me know in the comments below. I'm always reading them. Unless you ask, why don't you add multiplayer? Then I certainly lose my ability to read. So yeah, this is all that I have to show you today. I hope you enjoyed this video where I talk more about stories. If you reached this far, consider subscribing to the channel and also liking the video. It would really help me achieve my dream of making this channel my living. And yeah, I have been Void, and I'll see you next time!